Hi, everyone. Dr. Abby Kramer here on The Fringe, and I'm here with Dr. Genevieve Newton, and we are going to chat all about magnesium today. It's going to be like a Magnesium 101 school.
Exactly. Yes.
So, Jen, can you tell us a bit, like a broad definition? What exactly is magnesium? Everyone hears about it constantly, but
hmm
what is it and what actions does it have in the body?
Yeah. Okay. So, starting place, it is a mineral. Specifically, it's a macro mineral, meaning you need relatively large amounts of it compared to some of the other minerals. So, that being said, it's really an abundant mineral in terms of its distribution in our bodies and also in the earth. So, if you were to go and sample rocks around, the entire globe, you'll find magnesium all over the place. So, it's essential because of the fact that it is a micronutrient that we need in order to survive and to thrive and to be healthy. So we can get it from our diet, and it's actually very, very, very widely distributed in food. So, like some really good sources would be things like your leafy green vegetables, your legumes, your nuts, your seeds, those types of things. But we also find it kind of as we move in through the food chain, right? So if it's in the soil, it gets incorporated into plants. We eat those plant foods. It has magnesium in it. The animals eat the plants. We eat the animals.
Hmm.
They have magnesium in them. So it's really distributed everywhere. But we have, as you know, you and I have talked about so many times over the last few years, this really pervasive issue of deficiency in terms of our
Hmm.
soil. And I know we'll get to that when we kind of look at the issue of deficiency and how prevalent it is. But going back to just this starting place, so we have this very, very wide distribution. We're supposed to be getting it really abundantly in our diet, and then we distribute it all throughout our body. But one of the things that's challenging about magnesium is in terms of us being able to identify um, kind of what someone's magnesium status is that it isn't found in high concentrations in our blood. So we see it
Hmm.
as it gets into the body. It's used for so many different things, which I'm going to go through in a moment. But it's found really like inside the cells. It's intracellular. So we don't have a good way of assessing really like we do for vitamin D. It's a simple at-home blood test or for a lot of people. It's very,
Hmm.
very easy to do and very accessible. So this whole conversation about magnesium is clouded by a couple, actually more than a couple, of really sort of silent variables that we don't have much control over. And one of those is how much is now in our food, and
Hmm.
then another is how much is in our body. And when it comes to our body, um, when I was initially writing our big blog about magnesium, I chose to use the biggest number that I could find so that we could get the best understanding of how many things in the body magnesium is
Hmm.
involved in. Because when you read about it, the number that you usually see is that magnesium is involved in over 300 chemical reactions of the body. But that's related to its really more direct role as being bound to an enzyme and regulating how
Hmm.
that enzyme functions. If we extrapolate that to just look at everything that it's all of the reactions that it participates in to some extent, that goes up to over 800. So we have over 800 physiological reactions in which magnesium is either going to be bound to that enzyme or it's going to need to be present in some way in the medium to make it essentially
Hmm.
happen. So, it plays a role in so many different things. One of the big ones is energy metabolism. Like if you look at ATP, we see that the ATP molecule actually has a magnesium um, bound to it, which is like so wild. So it's involved in that. And then when we
Yeah.
look at all of these metabolic reactions, like the Krebs cycle, and different reactions of glycolysis, and just all of these metabolic processes where we're making energy, it's very, very, very integral to that. Another big thing that it's involved in is DNA synthesis, RNA synthesis, protein synthesis. So all of these things that we need to like builds the
Yeah.
substrates of our body. It's also really important for bone health, right? If we look inside of a bone, sometimes people think, oh, bones are just calcium. No, you're going to see a lot of different minerals in there, and magnesium is a really,
Yep.
really important one. Cardiovascular function and the way that our nerves and communicate with our muscles, that neuromuscular connection signaling, that is another place where magnesium plays a very important role. And then the last one I'd say is really in our blood insulin sugar signaling. So you can see, like, that's just an absolutely massive list. So it's really, really, really,
Mhm.
widespread in terms of its importance, widespread in terms of its roles in the body, and it should be very widespread in our environment, but we do have some limitations due to our modern world. One of the other places that I didn't mention that we do find magnesium, and this is something that a lot of people don't know about, is that it's not only found in our foods, so in our plant foods, those really supposedly very high concentrations, and then, the animal sources as well, but it's also really supposed to be found in our water. So, depending on
Yep.
where you are geographically, this really does vary by location because it all has to do with the distribution in the rocks. And as the water passes through, it picks up these minerals. But historically speaking, water has also been a reasonable source of magnesium in some populations. It's one of those things that when we talk about hard water, that people have in their houses and it
Mhm.
builds up in their pipes and stuff, that will usually be a combination of magnesium and calcium. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite supplements to use, and I know it's one of your
Yep.
favorite supplements to use in practice. Like, how do you go about recommending magnesium to your patients? Who do you recommend it to?
So, the short answer is everyone, because
Yeah,
find me someone that's getting enough magnesium through their lifestyle, through food and water these days, right? Like,
yeah.
there's a handful of supplements, which if you guys have listened or followed us, we have the essentials line for a reason because those are the supplements we believe that everyone pretty much should be taking every single day. So, magnesium falls into that category much like all the other minerals and trace minerals, vitamin D, we've just talked about super recently. So, most people, if not everyone, could benefit from magnesium supplementation. But I think the easier route is like if I kind of go into the main symptom pictures people struggle with, where I'm like, oh my gosh, you need magnesium right now, right? Because just like vitamin D deficiency, there's kind of a spectrum, right? There's people that have glaring, like daily symptoms that are screaming magnesium deficiency. And there's other people who really feel pretty good, but they still could use that daily boost because they're likely not getting enough. But magnesium is one of the number one supplements in my practice where you get people on a good quality magnesium at a therapeutic dose and they feel it.
Mhm.
And it's like, it's such a low lift. Like, not enough people take magnesium. I've said this, I will keep saying this forever. Like, arguably, at least this is where I stand right now. We all learn more and change. But if you're going to take one supplement a day, I would probably make it magnesium.
I would
This
agree.
is what I'm saying right now on April 10th, 2026.
Yeah,
We'll see if
no,
in
and
5 years I'm saying the same thing, but
it's true, but I'm in
very
full agreement.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Maybe I'll say mushrooms in a year. Who knows? But magnesium, okay, so main things, people with muscle cramping or tension. If people get charley horses at night, if they feel like they're always having muscle cramps and issues, magnesium, definitely. Start taking. People that get chronic headaches, that's a massive one for magnesium, whether they be tension, migraine, whatever. People that have trouble falling asleep and staying asleep, magnesium is a great one to give that a go and then take it before bed if that's you. Um, People with any sort of heart condition, cardiovascular issues should definitely take magnesium. People with anxiety or stress should definitely take magnesium. And people with like joint pain, inflammation, arthritis, that sort of thing should take magnesium. I feel like that's the main buckets where I'm like immediately like, let's get you on a magnesium supplement.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Do you recommend it to, in like higher doses to people who are dealing with diabetes, anything like that? Or do you find that kind of like your typical supplementation regimen is enough?
That so depends on the person, because the other one I forgot to mention was digestive issues, especially if people tend towards constipation.
Mm.
Even not getting on, like, a laxative form of magnesium, just getting their, like, elemental magnesium levels good in their body can straighten that out real fast. Um, it ju it so depends on the person. I'd say the average adult, I probably put on somewhere in the range of 200 to 600 milligrams per day. And that's why we started our magnesium product is 200 per scoop per serving, because for a lot of people, that's a great dose. And I always like my patients to be at the lowest effective dose. If you take 200 milligrams a day and your headaches go away and you sleep awesome, great. You don't need 400. But some people really need to be closer to that 600 range for whatever reason, right? And there we could go down the rabbit hole of this, the people with gut issues, are you absorbing it well? Are you taking a poor quality magnesium that's really going to affect absorption? So I've seen people before that are taking like 1,000 milligrams a night, but they're taking a crappy form of magnesium, right? So you get them on a high quality one, you shouldn't quite need that much.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And I think that what you're saying, like that's entirely consistent with what I see in the scientific literature. But that being said, the scientific literature in this area, I really don't trust it. I think we have a few
Mm,
issues, as I mentioned before, that are layered on top of each other. So, one is that, as I said, it's hard to measure magnesium status in the body. So, what we do is we tend to depend on dietary intake
mhm.
records. And so, whether that be a food frequency questionnaire, a dietary recall, a 3-day food record, a 7-day food
Yeah,
record, whatever, we've got all these tools that are used whereby people remember the food that they eat, mark down the food that they eat, and then you put that into a nutrition database and it spits out numbers for you based on
right.
these analyses that were done a long time ago.
Yeah, so
And
those aren't even accurate.
they're not accurate. And there's been literally it's radio silence in the scientific literature about this. No one's raising any alarms whatsoever. And we've seen that there are, studies that have come out where they've taken samples of vegetables and fruits and grains and different products from different geographical locations,
Mhm.
and there's a, v- a n- level of depletion of magnesium that ranges from, maybe as low as 20%, but all the way up to 80 to 90%. So that being said, it does make actually getting an accurate measurement of what's in food really difficult because it depends on the
Right.
geographical location. But then we don't have, on the other hand, we don't have the ability to just go in and do a really good biochemical sample of people
Yep.
easily where we can say, okay, this is what people's magnesium status is. And even considering those two really big limitations, we still see that numbers show up in the literature that range from like 45 to 60% of people are deficient in
Oh,
their
right.
intake, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at that, I think you can really safely say, okay, pretty much everybody is
Right.
deficient. And
Yep.
then on top of that, we have another issue, which is, and this is true for really all of our micronutrients, what we do when we determine what the recommended nutrient intake is, right? Which will be either an adequate intake or an RDA, that recommended
Mhm.
daily allowance. We look at how much does it take to, and this has been done, this isn't like, the 1900s or early to mid sort of thing. How much does it take to prevent a deficiency disease? That doesn't tell you how much you need for optimal health. And
Correct.
there's very little research that, is accurate on what
Mhm.
our ancestors would have consumed. But the estimates for magnesium are that our ancestors consumed about 600 milligrams of elemental magnesium a day. Our RDA is set between 310 and 420, depending on your age and your sex. So there's a disconnect there
There's a
just to
gap.
begin with. And then we have yet our last layer, which is that body sizes have increased a lot over the
Yep.
last, several decades. And as our body size increases, our magnesium requirements increase. So there have been estimates that that can be up to 200 milligrams a day or more, compared to what that RDA was set
Mm,
at, which we already just said was not necessarily optimal for health, but
yep.
to prevent disease. So it's just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of issues related to our understanding of both the extent of the deficiency problem, um, but really also how much to use and how to go about fixing it. That becomes a problem as well when we look at it in these terms, because there's just so many things that we don't know. You're going to recommend to people, well, that you so often hear, because this is the dietetics response: go to food first, go to food first, go to
Yep.
food first, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can't go to food first with this. And
Right.
even if you are lucky enough to eat a very high quality diet, um, the amount that you're consuming is
Still
probably
isn't
very
there.
low, but you're not going to know what it is because you don't really know where it came from and the
Right.
geographical, you know, soil depletion extent. So yeah,
Yep.
it's a huge issue. So you
Well,
kind of
it's like
mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, back to the soil conversation, right? So, unless you're if you are getting everything from, like, a regenerative farm, you might be able to do it,
You might,
right?
yeah.
But it's like, who can do that on every single food they're consuming, right?
Mhm.
So, it's the bottom line is our soil just is, like, mostly dead now.
Yeah, and
So
our water too, and it depends on, if you're dealing with, if you're buying a more inexpensive food base, which
yep,
unfortunately many people need to consume, those farming practices tend to deplete the soil to an even
yeah,
greater extent, right?
correct, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you see as far as like clinical responses in your practice when you supplement people with magnesium?
I mean, magnesium's amazing. Almost you name it because, like, you spoke to so well earlier, like, give me a system of the body that isn't affected by magnesium, and by, like, being low in magnesium that needs magnesium to thrive, right? But all of the things I spoke about before, like problems people might have, I've seen cramping go away, like, overnight, people that get nightly Charlie horses. I've seen headaches reduce significantly and some people completely. I've seen digestive balance restored, and I find with magnesium, most people feel a difference fairly quickly. It's not like, "Oh, it takes, 3 months to see a difference." It usually is pretty fast. People notice, especially if they're at the right dose. So I would encourage people if you're like, I've taken magnesium for so long and it hasn't affected my headaches, try upping your dose, especially if you're taking a high quality one, like what we make, one that isn't gonna like disrupt your GI.
Mhm.
Um, I've seen it really help people with like brain fog and stuff like that, even like cognition. It helped with anxiety. I always make sure people are on magnesium for, like you spoke about earlier, bone health. Like if you're
Mhm.
taking a great vitamin D and K, make sure you're also taking magnesium because that's also really important there.
Mhm.
Um, it's just such a great product. Like whatever issue you have, basically, magnesium could support that. And so it's worth adding it to your daily supplement stack if you haven't yet and see what you notice. But I'd say those are the biggest, heaviest hitters.
Yeah, I've definitely seen most of those in the scientific literature. So, um, magnesium has been relatively well researched, certainly as far as supplements go. Um, and it hits across a lot of different clinical outcomes. So, as you said, things like sleep and things like cognition and migraines. One of the issues that is interesting in the literature with respect to supplementation is that, and I think this is what we would call just a historical artifact, is that a lot of these studies used really crappy forms of magnesium
Yeah.
to supplement with. They really did. So they're
Like
using
oxide,
magnesium
probably.
oxide and they're
Yeah.
using magnesium citrate. So I guess I didn't really talk about this when we were talking about what magnesium is, because it is an important component of the discussion, and that's that it is found in these different supplemental forms, right? So when we're talking about magnesium itself, we're just talking about the element, but when we find that
Mhm.
element, in nature, it's reacted to something else. And so we have these inorganic forms and we have these organic forms. It just depends on what it's bonded to. So magnesium oxide, for example, is like a super common inorganic form of magnesium. And these inorganic forms tend to be really poorly absorbed, whereas the organic forms are more highly bioavailable. They get into our body to a much greater extent, but even that really varies across forms.
Hmm.
So if we look at these studies that are maybe using like 600 milligrams of supplementation of magnesium oxide, well, that could be the equivalent of, 400 milligrams of
Yeah.
supplementation of a more bioavailable form. So it's something that does kind of make it complicated when you're saying, I'm going to look at the scientific literature, I'm going to look at the
Yeah.
doses they use, and I'm going to replicate that because
It's different.
yeah, it can definitely be different. But even that being like a confounding variable in the scientific literature, we still see some really dramatic results across a lot
Hmm.
of these outcomes. Like,
Well,
yeah, it,
that's what I was gonna say. Even despite being like a cheap, poorly absorbed form, you still see crazy results.
you
So
do.
it's like,
Absolutely. But
with
that's
the
when you
even better
start seeing,
form.
yeah, you start seeing more of the side effects. And that's one of the things
Yeah.
that people worry about, right? They're like, oh, I can't take magnesium because it's going to give me diarrhea. Well, if you take magnesium oxide, it is potentially, if you take a higher dose, it's going to give you diarrhea for sure. But that's not necessarily the case with these more bioavailable. They're much more GI friendly.
Yeah.
I was just reading, there's a really interesting systematic review of all of the sleep studies and trying to remember the numbers. It was something like people fell asleep 17 minutes faster in this in all of these controlled studies.
Hmm.
And then they slept like 16 minutes longer. So it really does have, you know,
That's
that's a
amazing.
very dramatic effect on sleep. The other one that you've mentioned is people seeing really good benefits with are headaches. And most of the studies have looked at migraine headaches specifically, and they've
Yeah.
been like really, really consistently demonstrating positive, very positive
Yes.
response to it. Yeah. Blood pressure, that's another one that's been researched. And, I was just reading like a series of articles that were written in Subco, and so they did like this series on magnesium over the last
Hmm.
few weeks, and it was interesting. But I think they downplayed the importance of magnesium to some extent, kind of talking about some of the negative or not negative results, but some of the studies that don't find positive results,
Mm.
and so the conclusion was really important mineral, but they called it, the term that they used was like physiologically upstream, which absolutely it is. We just talked about
Yeah.
how it's really important in fundamentally in a lot of processes, right? So, that being said, though, you and I have just talked about all of these limitations in terms of interpreting that research, right? So,
Yeah.
issues with bioavailability and absorption and dosing and measurement of body status of magnesium.
Yeah.
Like I definitely think that when you look at the scientific literature as a whole, you really see that it's a very, very consistently beneficial
Yeah.
supplement to use.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So I
And
would say
low
that.
risk. The other research
Very
one
low
I
risk.
wanted the other research one I wanted to mention was I can't believe I forgot to say this earlier. The menstrual cramp one, which I'm
Oh yes,
very
yes.
excited about still.
Yeah.
Menstrual cramps, taking one group was placebo. One group took 150 milligrams a night. The other group took 300 milligrams, night or day, whatever. And the women, they were all younger women who experienced menstrual cramping with their cycle. They just had them take it during their luteal phase for like the 10 to 14 days before their period. It wasn't even the entire month long, and like crazy positive results.
Yes. Yeah,
So
definitely.
anyone that experiences that, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, and that probably, has to do with that neuromuscular action, right? The relaxation, and you have those prostaglandins that are made and they cause the cramping and the tightening, and if you can counteract that with magnesium, like, yeah,
Mhm.
it's amazing. So you mentioned the doses in night and day. Like, how do you typically recommend to people that they supplement when you're giving them these protocols? Like, what do you
Yeah.
do you recommend that they divide doses during the day? How much do you recommend people take?
I don't recommend they divide it if they're taking a good quality magnesium because it shouldn't mess up their gut. So it's more, I mean, the first thing for me is always because magnesium is such a like daily essential supplement. It's whenever you're going to be consistent is my answer. Because a
Mm,
lot of people, they take all their stuff in the morning, they forget to take it at night. And then, they come back to me and it's like, probably 3 days out of the week I took it. Right. So it's like, just take it in the morning then. But if, like, sleep is your concern, you really should be taking it at bedtime
yeah.
to get that, like, positive effect. But, the name of the game with supplements like this, like our essentials, and whenever you can be consistent. If you take everything at lunchtime, go for it. If you're a
Yeah.
nighttime person, go for it. Magnesium, I haven't found, is going to make you, like, sleepy during the day.
No.
It just, like, really supports, like, deep, restful sleep if you take it at night. By the way, I need you to send me that sleep study, the review.
Mm, mhm.
We need to do a post
Absolutely.
on that. That's an
Yes.
extra 30 minutes of sleep. That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And I think your point about make it so that it fits into people's routine, that's like the top recommendation. And then
Mhm.
second, if it's not going to be an issue with remembering for you, then definitely take it at night because that's when you're going to potentially see the most benefit. That being said, if you're somebody that does deal with anxiety, then that maybe dividing and having that morning
Yeah.
dose is also a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, particularly if you're gonna be taking something that has magnesium glycinate in it. 'Cause that's one of the
Correct.
things that we haven't really, talked about, are the different forms of magnesium. Do you wanna talk about how our magnesium is, formulated and how it's kinda unique to other products on the
Mhm.
market?
Yeah. So ours is quite unique. I'd say the majority of magnesium supplements on the market are one form, which nothing wrong with that. So each form kind of has its own little personality and benefit. And I really wanted to do a blend and then so you get multiple different benefits in one supplement. But I feel like some of the other blends on the market are almost too many forms. And then it's
Yeah.
like therapeutically, are you actually getting enough malate for like muscle recovery, right? If it's just like a sprinkle of 8 different forms, you're still getting the elemental magnesium. So you're still going to have a lot of benefit. But we really wanted to hit that sweet spot where people are getting enough to have that specific benefit and then enough overall magnesium for on a daily basis. So we chose to have magnesium glycinate, which is probably my favorite form of magnesium. It's great for stress, anxiety, and sleep. So people like if you have a busy brain, magnesium glycinate will be your best friend. So I really like it. It's a nice gentle calming effect. Magnesium malate, which is great for muscle cramping, exercise recovery, joint pain and inflammation, that kind of family of things. And then magnesium orotate, which I kind of fell in love with just from researching. I'd never used it before or really heard of it. And it's pretty cool. It's great for heart health. And there's some studies even on it supporting gut health, which was super cool to me. And I just had not seen like almost anyone use it in their products. And I was like, this is
Yeah.
so undervalued.
Yeah, I agree. So the research that there is on magnesium orotate is very positive. The flip
Hmm.
side of that is there isn't a lot of research because it is a higher quality, more expensive form,
Yep.
and it's a newer form. Definitely, the research shows that magnesium glycinate is like it's the one that everybody goes to when they switch into like a higher quality magnesium supplement.
Yeah.
If anybody who is taking sort of that cheaper was usually at this point taking magnesium citrate, maybe magnesium oxide.
Yep.
But then if you start kind of upping your game and going to something, people are always like, take magnesium glycinate, which
Yeah.
you'll also see on the bottle. It'll say magnesium bisglycinate. It's just
Hmm.
related to the molecular structure. And there is a lot of research on that then in terms of benefits. And I think it has been difficult, and it's always difficult to measure effects on anxiety. They're just sort of traditionally anything related to mood and cognition is harder to study. So the studies, straight up, they're not all consistent in terms of showing benefits,
Hmm.
but they used widely different ranges. They used different populations. A lot of the research is unfortunately didn't select for people who had a lower magnesium intake to begin with, right? So that's
Mm,
something that you
right.
really want to do when you're measuring, trying to measure effects with supplementation is, of course, you want to know what happens in a more healthier population, but also you want to know what happens in a deficient population. We really haven't unpacked
Right.
that. Yeah, yeah. So what about our dosing? How do you feel about recommending to people, and where do they start, and how should they use it?
Yep. I would recommend people when you start, you're talking about, if we're talking about our magnesium mix
Yeah.
supplement, you start with 1 scoop a day, which is 200 milligrams, and plan on doing that for 30 days. But I would say within a week or two, if you don't notice the result you're looking for, to go up to 2 scoops. I have, I would say the majority of my patients are on 400 to 600 milligrams a day. Now, that doesn't mean people can't get great results at 200. So it so depends on the person, but I don't think many people need to go straight to like 600 unless maybe that's what you were taking before with a different product or something like that. And you find your sweet spot on what gets you sleeping better, feeling better, less anxiety, etc. Everyone can be a little bit different, but I would start with 1 scoop a day, give that a week or two, then up it as needed. Some people might do great at a scoop and a half, which would be right around 300.
Hmm.
So that's what's nice with it being in a powder form is you can play around with the dosage rather easily. Or like you were saying too, some people find it really nice to do a scoop in the morning and a scoop at night. And you're supporting anxiety and stress levels during the day. A lot of people really notice that's a positive benefit and then sleep at night.
And then how would you differentiate like our product with respect to the other ingredients in it compared to what's on the market?
Oh my goodness. Well, the powdered magnesium market is a dumpster fire. So, that is the same story as our electrolytes, as our powdered products is almost all of them, if not all of them, probably all the ones I've seen are going to have natural flavors. They're gonna be like half citric acid. I should do this again because I have a tub of a competitor's powdered magnesium and our tub. They're around the same dosage per scoop, and the tub and the scooper is about double the size
Mm.
in the competitors as ours, right? So then you've got to ask yourself, what is that? What's all
Mhm.
that extra white powder, right? It's probably a bunch of maltodextrin and citric acid. So you always want to look at, and I feel like people are out of the habit of this when you're looking at labels. There's the supplement facts label, which is like the different forms of magnesium. There's 200 milligrams in a scoop in here, but underneath there in very tiny print is other ingredients or additional ingredients. And that's where you're going to find the sweeteners, the gums, the preservatives, the flow agents, the flavorings, all of that stuff. You want that to be as minimal as possible. And ideally, it's ingredients you recognize. That you're like, I know what that is, or I've heard of that before. Obviously, with our powdered magnesium, we added a bit of thaumatin. Spoiler alert, magnesium tastes terrible, you guys. So if you open up a magnesium capsule and put it in your mouth, you will understand why we put that in there. So it's just slightly sweet. I could put it in like my whole water bottle and I probably wouldn't taste much, but it's very easy to mix into a smoothie, a little bit of water, some juice. You could put it in your kid's yogurt. To add to things is quite simple. I usually just put it with our electrolytes and then done.
And it is important for people to understand that there can be, if it's in a water bottle, there can be a little bit of sediment at the
Yep.
bottom, right? Because it's a mineral, it's inorganic, it can precipitate to the bottom.
Yep.
That's totally,
Normal.
totally normal. Yeah.
Yep.
What about for kids? What do you recommend for kids?
For kids, I love magnesium as well. Very similar story. They're deficient just as are adults. And so we have that. Well, it's in our FAQ. I don't think it's on the actual packaging. But according to children's age, we just titrate up. So kids that are closer to adult size, like, 13 and up, they can do a full scoop just like adults can. I think people get scared with like kids in like middle school, high school range.
Mhm.
They're like, can they take an adult product? I'm like, your kid's a foot taller than me. They sure can. Right? Once they're like full grown, it's magnesium. It's very safe. So we should actually post that maybe in these show notes. Evan, I'll say that to our producer listening in, that we can post the kids' dosing according to age on what we recommend. But again, magnesium is a very, very safe supplement. If your kids struggle with sleep, that is probably the first thing I would start adding for them because it's so safe, it's so gentle, and can really help the kids that wake up a lot or have a problem winding down at night. That would be a great way to support them.
Yeah, it's, now that you're talking about, that it just brought something to mind, and that's that some people, when they look at kind of the mainstream literature about magnesium supplementation, is they might see that there's a recommended upper limit on supplementation, and I can't remember what the number is right now. I think it's 350 milligrams. However, that
That's the
is
upper limit?
offer supplementation, but that's not the upper limit for intake. It's for what the recommendation is for supplementation, but it's based on GI upset. That's what
Yeah,
it's based on. So I
right.
wanted to just kind of put it in there that, again, I said that there is this historical precedent of using these poorly bioavailable GI upsetting forms of magnesium. And so when
Yes.
the Institute of Medicine and the governments look at the literature that's been done with supplementation and they see that there's a side effect of, GI upset, that's when they say, oh, we're going to put a recommended upper limit on it. When really we now have these much more gut friendly, that
Correct.
really don't cause GI issues. And the other part of it is that it's very easy to get around that by, if you do find that you have a sensitive gut, even despite using a more bioavailable form, you just separate it into a morning and an
Yep.
evening dose, right? You have two
Yes.
doses. And then the other thing that it made me think about was that there can still be some confusion, um, in terms of how much elemental magnesium is in an ingredient. So you might
Yep.
find, a capsule that says 500 milligrams of magnesium glycinate. But
Yes.
then when you look and you see the elemental magnesium in magnesium glycinate, it could be, I'm trying to think of what that actually would be. Oh, it's like 70 milligrams, I think, for
Yep.
magnesium glycinate. So that would be the equivalent. So if the bottle says 500 milligrams of magnesium, and you're like, this is great, I can just take one pill, that's all it is, you got to make sure that you look and on
Yes.
that label and see what's the actual amount of magnesium
Yes.
elementally, and that will
Yes.
be 70 or so
And
for
I
a
remember that was, like,
yeah.
so confusing for us when we first started researching this. We're like,
Yeah, because
"What
just because
is
of the way that
going on?"
it's reported, right? It's the
Yes.
it's the it's the molecular weight versus the elemental
Well, and
amount.
on labels, you can label it so many different ways,
Yeah, yeah,
right? We've seen that, like, our manufacturer will, send us, like, 5 different options for a label, and it's like, pick one. So it can be kind of misleading,
very much so.
based on, yeah, however people are choosing to label it.
Yeah, so there are guaranteed there are many, many people out there who are supplementing far less magnesium than they think
Yes.
they are because they're looking at that full amount of the magnesium element complexed with whatever it's
Yep.
mixed with. So
Yep.
that's kind of the last thing. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else kind of in closing that you think we've missed today? Or I think we've covered most of the magnesium 101 issues.
Yep.
It's a very, very important mineral. Obviously, that's why we included it in our fringe essentials. And it's great to be able to talk about some of the issues that no one is talking about in this space, like underestimating your magnesium intake if you're using a dietary tracking app, for example. Like if you
Yes.
use Chronometer or you use, MyFitnessPal or whatever, you are getting a number from there that's probably not at all what you're
Right.
actually
So
consuming.
what would you say people should assume then, that, like, say they're doing that?
Yeah.
Is it like you should assume you're, like, getting half the amount it actually says?
It's yeah, this is the thing,
It's hard
we
to
don't
say.
even know, we really don't know. I think that at this point, it's safe to say that everybody is consuming, less than they think they are if they're
Yeah,
being very careful about their consumption and it's only coming from food. Certainly, if you're consuming a supplement and you know what the amount of elemental magnesium is in there, that's going to give you a much more accurate, at least one accurate intake
right.
source. But if it's just coming from food, it's not accurate. And as you said, could it be half as much? Yeah, it could be half as much. It might be
Yeah,
more. It might be less.
yeah,
It really depends. And until those studies are done, we're not going to know. And all we see so far are just a handful of studies that have taken food products, natural food products, and analyzed their magnesium content and have found this massive range, going from like
mhm,
20% to 90% depletion over the last several decades. So
yes,
it's a bit of a mess out there.
yeah.
And as you've said many times in this podcast, it's a very safe supplement. So it goes on both of our number one lists in terms of what we both recommend for sure.
Yeah, so the take home of this episode is get on magnesium if you haven't, or get on a better one if you have struggled in the past with symptoms. It likely was the form or all of the other whatever ingredients were in there because it's an important one.
Yeah, agreed.